Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. I've been reading these stories a lot, and while I did post a story about my great-grandfather a while back because I recently heard it from my mother and grandmother, a new story that I had almost forgotten about came flooding back to me recently. The main reason I'm remembering this is because of a recent phone call that I took in from my current job. This is a long story with some backstory, so bear with me. This story happened about 10 years ago during the early 2010s. I was 17 and had just recently gotten a job as a dishwasher at a local summer camp. This was a large camp that was run by a corporation. I won't say the name of the corporation, but there is a very famous song named after them. I had been to this summer camp before as a kid, so I knew the layout of the camp. My job started up on the first week of summer, mid-June, so the kids were already there. I had my interview with the acting kitchen manager, who we will call Megan. The original manager had just recently left the company and put Megan in charge. This didn't seem to bother Megan, as she was eyeing for the kitchen manager job that had recently opened. "So, have you ever worked in a kitchen before?" Megan asked during my interview. "No, but I'm a quick learner and I really need this job," I replied nervously. Megan smiled warmly. "Don't worry about it. Everyone starts somewhere and we've got plenty of staff who can show you the ropes." Megan was a sweetheart. She was nice and helped me out with everything. I also interviewed with Greg, the camp director, as Megan did not have any hiring or firing power, as she was just an acting manager. The majority of the kitchen staff were also nice and helpful. I made friends with them during the time I worked there. While there was way more than these people, I remember there being around 10 to 15 kitchen staff members during the summer. I am only going to bring up ones that are important to this story. There was Mike, an older guy who lived only a few blocks from the camp and didn't have a car, so he rode his bike in the morning, who was also a dishwasher. He was my supervisor, but also really nice. James, the head cook, had been there for a long time and used to be a cook for the local middle school. Rachel, another cook. Zoe, a kitchen server, later girlfriend. And Dimitri, a Russian dishwasher who had a sponsorship with the camp as part of their Worldview program. There were 3 other dishwashers, Dumb, Dumber, and Dumbest, who I will call the slackers, but they are not part of Revenge, just that there were 3 dishwashers that were the worst. Nobody got along with them, and they couldn't get fired because Megan was acting manager. Now, due to the fact that we were located at a camp, the staff had full access to the facilities of the camp. This means that during my breaks or off work, if the camp was open, I was allowed to go to the swimming pool, go horseback riding, or even boating. As long as I didn't get in the way of the kids, who had a set schedule, it was full access. Megan told me this along with the director of the camp, Greg, during my interview. Greg was also a nice man, but also kind of weird. This is important later on. During the summer, this place was wonderful. I would typically start working the lunch shift, then have an hour lunch break between lunch and dinner. While I was required by state law for a half-hour lunch, Megan gave me an hour, which she did for everyone. "You kids work hard," she'd say. "You deserve some time to actually enjoy the place." Typically during this hour, I would go swimming or play with the horses. One time, Greg and I went jet boating around the lake, or Zoe and I would make out in the pool. Just typical stuff a teenage boy would do. Most everyone in the kitchen staff loved me, as I was a model employee and helped with just about everything. They loved that they had someone who they could get help with, as the slackers would always mess up. "Where would we be without you?" James would say, patting me on the back. "These other kids can't tell a spatula from a spoon." In August, we got the news. The corporation had picked a new kitchen manager, and it was someone from outside of the company. Megan was really upset. She had worked so hard for years for this job, and the higher-ups picked someone outside of the company. The new manager was named Heather. The first time we met Heather, she gave a speech how new changes are coming and we will now work as a team, and was condescending about Megan's work. "I know things have been a little relaxed around here," Heather said during her first staff meeting, looking pointedly at Megan, "but that's about to change. We're going to run this kitchen like professionals." The first thing she did was do a massive cleanup to the large walk-in fridges. The strange thing was she didn't have the staff do it, but it was, later on we found out, her family cleaning it out. She also hired her husband Eric to be the assistant manager, pretty much forcing Megan out. During this time, the camp was starting to transition from a summer camp to an event camp. So the large staff would be cut in half. This wasn't a problem normally, as people would be leaving for school or other seasonal jobs start opening up. The first people she cut were the slackers. Everyone was happy on that. And that was the only good thing she did. But in the end, all that was left was Zoe, James, Mike, Rachel, Dimitri, a few others, and me. I asked Heather if I could work the weekend, as I had high school, and she agreed since everyone else had wanted to keep me on staff. Heather then begins her terror. It only took a week, but it happened. Her fangs started to show and the power got to her head. Each person felt the wrath of her. She was one of those people who thinks their farts don't smell. She would come in late, leave early, but yell at everyone for doing the same thing. Everyone had problems with her, but here are a few that I remember. Mike was starting to get written warnings about coming in late. Heather placed him on the morning shift, but he told her that he couldn't do the morning shift or he would be late as he doesn't have a car and bikes into work. As the camp is located in a rural area, it doesn't have streetlights and biking in the morning is dangerous. This isn't a problem during the summer as the sun is up earlier, but during the fall and winter time is not acceptable. Look, I've been biking here for 3 years, Mike tried to explain, but in the dark with no lights on these roads. I don't want to hear excuses, Heather cut him off. You're just lazy for not having a car and it doesn't matter. I need you in here on time. James, the head cook, was starting to get fed up with Heather ordering too little of the food and the wrong food, having cheaper products and being forced to work with a broken stove. One time, he asked her when the stove would be fixed, and her response was, "Fix it yourself, you're a big boy." So oftentimes, we would run out of food for the night and had to make sandwiches for the people. This is ridiculous, James muttered one night as we scrambled to make sandwiches for a group of 50 people. I told her 3 times we needed more chicken for tonight's dinner. What did she say? I asked. That I was wasting food and should learn to budget better, he scoffed. As if I haven't been doing this job for 15 years. Zoe got the worst of it. Since we were dating, I found out that she had an eating disorder a few years earlier. She was 2 years older than me and used to be anorexic. Heather kept calling her piggy and fat and how she shouldn't eat all the food in the kitchen. She was upset and crying the whole time when this happened. Why does she hate me so much? Zoe sobbed in the break room after one particularly nasty encounter. I'm just doing my job. I confronted Heather about it and she said she shouldn't be a sheltered college brat and should just grow up, and if she has a problem, she should talk to me, not you. But you're the one making her feel terrible, I argued. Watch your tone, Heather snapped. You're just a dishwasher. Mind your own business. I also felt the wrath of her too. She would change my schedule around randomly after posting it. On Friday, we would get our schedules for the week. I typically worked Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday because of high school. During the week, she would change my schedule, so I was working on Friday night, she changed it to Wednesday night, and then would call saying I missed Wednesday night. Unlucky for her, James had my number and called me whenever he found a schedule change, but it was getting old quickly. She would also tell me to do a job, then change what to do. For example, one time she told me to clean the oven, and when I was near finishing up on the job, she asked why I didn't clean the stove and get mad when I said she told me to do the oven. I specifically said stove, not oven, she'd insist, even though everyone heard her say oven. Another example was that she would tell me to mop the floor and Dimitri would come over and help me out because he had nothing to do and then get on me for Dimitri finishing my job, even though Dimitri spoke up and said that he asked her if he could help me and she said yes. Another example was that she cut my break from an hour to half hour and not allowing me to use the facilities during my break since I was only on break to eat, not play. After a few weeks of this, late September, I went to Greg about her and told him everything about what she was doing to us. I found out from Greg that James also went to him earlier that week with the same thing. However, having the spine of a jellyfish, he said, I'll talk with Heather. Then a day later, Heather starts getting on us for going to Greg and not her saying, if you have a problem with me, you come to me, not Greg. This was the last straw for us, so I talked with the rest of the kitchen staff and we decided that she needed to leave. During one of my breaks, that she wasn't in the office that day when we were still trying to think of a way to get rid of her, I was eating my dinner in her office. The manager's office was the only one with AC in it, and it was a hot day. We all had permission to be in her office as it had the keys to the large fridge, tools, the private restroom, and whatnot. I'm eating dinner with Zoe when Dimitri comes looking for a pen. He was trying to fill out information so he could go home to Russia, I don't remember what, just that he was planning on leaving in 3 weeks, and sits down at her desk. Man, this office has better air than all of kitchen, Dimitri said, fanning himself as he sat down. Just don't touch anything important, I warned. What, like this? He joked, opening a drawer. He was opening up the desk to find a black pen when he finds a check. It was a paycheck to one of the slackers who left a month earlier. It was his final paycheck, highly illegal to withhold a paycheck. Dimitri showed us the paycheck, and then he started to look at the computer that was on her desk. While Heather was a jerk, she was also careless and left everything unlocked. There, he saw the orders. She was ordering things that we never got into the kitchen or ordering extra stuff. It turns out that she was ordering more food than we thought, stealing the food and using it for her own personal use. Holy crap, Zoe whispered, looking over Dimitri's shoulder. Look at all these steaks she ordered last week. We didn't get any of those. I told Dimitri that he was looking through her personal files, and he said, "What are they going to do, deport me?" We also found out that Greg was getting a kickback from the extra food that Heather was getting in to keep quiet, so it explained why Greg had the spine of a jellyfish towards Heather. Dimitri printed out the information and held on to it. This is important later on. The three of us told James about it, and he wanted to confront Heather, but Rachel pointed out that she would just deny it and Greg would cover up. We thought about corporate, but we had no connections to corporate, and Megan had left the company, who used to have the connections. It then hit on us in about 3 weeks, mid-October. Corporate was going to be having a retreat using the camp. All the big wigs and high-ups were going to be there, and we were all scheduled to be at work that day because there was going to be a huge feast for dinner while lunch corporate was going to have grilled burgers and hot dogs. I remember that corporate brought in an outside vendor for the grilled stuff since they were preparing a big feast. Heather was also going to be there to impress the big wigs. We decided to act on that day, but also knew what to do beforehand. It was also going to be Dimitri's last day as he was leaving to Russia that night. "You know what would be perfect?" James said as we hatched our plan. "If we all just didn't work that day." "You mean quit?" Rachel asked. "Exactly," James nodded. "But we do it right when she needs us most. So, on the day of the feast, all of us show up on time at around noon. The dinner feast wasn't going to be until 5 p.m., so we had plenty of time to prepare, or at least that's what Heather thought. We got there and just sat down around the kitchen and did no work. We locked the freezer with a different lock. It was only locked with a normal deadbolt lock you can get at the hardware store. The janitor wasn't going to be in until later in the evening, thanks to James telling him about the plan and not to answer the phone, so he couldn't use his tools to break into the fridge. So we waited. "Should we be nervous?" I asked, looking at the clock. "Nah," Mike said. "What's she gonna do, fire us all?" Heather didn't get in until 4 p.m. with her husband. She looked as if she was ready for a major interview when she saw all of us just standing around. The stove wasn't on and cold, the fridge was locked, and we were just sitting around. Heather started to yell and talk about how today is important for her and that she would have our heads for this. "What the hell is going on here?" she screamed, her face turning red. "The corporate team will be here in an hour. Why isn't anything cooking? Why is the freezer locked?" So James comes up to her and says, "We quit." Heather went full-on deer in headlights, and her mouth was so wide open that you could throw peanuts into it. All of us walked out on her, into our cars, and drove away before she could get a word in. We decided to just quit. After we quit, all of us started to look for jobs. While some had security lined up since we knew that this was going to happen, but knew that a major shakeup like this would grab the attention of the big wigs. I found out a month later when I got a call from Megan, the original acting manager before Heather, asking me if I wanted my old job back. "You won't believe what happened after you all left," she laughed. "It was total chaos." It turns out that Heather called Greg and said her whole kitchen staff just left and they needed to tell the big wigs that the feast was going to be canceled. She couldn't get into the fridge with all the food since her key didn't work and nobody was picking up to help her. She tried to call others that left or were fired, but since she was so toxic that nobody wanted to work with her. The big wigs were not happy. They went right to the kitchen to find out what was wrong and saw that nobody but Greg, Heather, and Eric were there without any food cooking. Dimitri walks in and Heather starts yelling at him, saying how could he do this to her? Dimitri then hands the big wigs the printed information he got from Heather's computer earlier and had made copies of it, gave it to everyone in the room. Dimitri told me through email that he wasn't sure who was in charge, so he gave everyone in the room the information since he figured one of them had to be a head guy. Then got into a taxi and went back to Russia. Corporate started an investigation as soon as that happened. Greg, Heather, and Eric were fired almost right on the spot, and not only did they find out about the withholding checks and backdoor deals with Greg, but also Greg was stealing money from the camp to support a drug habit. "You should have seen their faces," Megan told me. "One of the VPs actually yelled, 'What kind of operation are you running here?' right in front of everyone." Heather and Greg were arrested for fraud and most likely other things. It has been about 10 years. I don't remember everything, but that one stuck out at me. Pretty much the whole camp had a shakeup. Megan took over as the manager, got the job she wanted with a pay raise. She did leave after they gave the job to Heather, but her new job wasn't working out. And about half of the staff came back. I did come back too. During the 2 months I was out of work, my parents were helping me out with bills. They forced me to pay for my own car insurance and gas. My grades were never the best in high school while this was happening. I came back, but only for a month since by that point it was in the middle of winter, and it was costing me more in gas to get to work than work was paying me. James came back to the job along with Rachel, but Zoe and I broke up. It was a summer love anyway. As she moved away for college, Mike never came back and works at a local liquor store. At least last I saw him. I haven't been in that store in about 5 years. So what happened now in my current job that caused me to remember this? Well, I got a call from Eric about a month ago recently wanting to do some work for him. However, he lived in another state that we aren't licensed to do work in, and that was pretty much the end of the conversation. Wait, Eric who? My coworker asked after I hung up. Just someone from a long time ago, I said. Brought back some wild memories, though. I decided to Google search her name, but didn't find much information except some court records about the original case from years ago. Eric and Heather do not appear to have any social media page or anything that I can find. I honestly don't care anymore, as it has been about 10 years since this happened, and I'm much happier at my current job. The next one is an entitled people story. When I bought my house 3 years ago, I thought I'd found the perfect setup. The property sat on a corner lot with a long driveway that curved around the back, giving me plenty of privacy and parking space. The previous owner had installed a beautiful wrought iron gate at the entrance to the driveway, and I loved the extra security and privacy it provided. What I didn't love was discovering that our HOA had some very interesting interpretations of property rights. The trouble started about 6 months after I moved in. Our neighborhood had been experiencing a parking crunch due to all the new construction nearby. The HOA had been looking for solutions, and apparently some bright spark on the board had noticed that my corner lot's driveway could theoretically provide access to the back parking area of our community center. See, here's where it gets interesting. My property line actually extended further than most people realized. The community center's back lot was accessible through a narrow strip of land that technically belonged to the HOA, but to get there from the street, you'd have to either walk around the entire block or cut through my driveway. With my gate closed, that second option wasn't available. The first hint of trouble came when I found HOA board member Janet standing in my driveway, measuring distances with a tape measure. When I asked what she was doing, she explained that the board was exploring options for additional parking access. She seemed surprised when I told her she was on private property and asked her to leave. A week later, I got my first official letter from the HOA. It was one of those formal notices they love to send, all legal sounding and intimidating. The letter informed me that my gate was creating an accessibility issue for community members trying to reach the back parking area of the community center. They requested that I keep the gate open during community events. I wrote back a polite but firm response explaining that my driveway was private property, and I had no obligation to provide access to anyone. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The letters kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. The HOA claimed they had historical usage rights to the area, even though there was absolutely no documentation of this. They argued that my gate was preventing emergency access, despite the fact that emergency vehicles had multiple other routes to the community center. The breaking point came when I received a letter threatening fines if I didn't remove the gate entirely. Not just keep it open during events, remove it completely. The letter stated that the gate was an unauthorized obstruction that prevented the efficient flow of neighborhood traffic. That's when I decided to dig into the property records and HOA bylaws. What I found was fascinating. The HOA had no legal claim to my driveway whatsoever. More importantly, I discovered that while they couldn't force me to remove my gate, there was absolutely nothing stopping me from controlling access to my property in other ways. I also learned something else interesting about my property boundaries. That narrow strip of land the HOA used to access their back parking, it ran right along my property line. In fact, there was a small section where the HOA's access path actually crossed onto my land by about 2 feet. The previous owner had apparently been fine with this informal arrangement, but legally I had every right to control that access. The HOA's final ultimatum arrived on a Tuesday. Remove the gate within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. They were so confident in their authority that they didn't even bother to research the legality of their demand. That's when I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I called a fencing company and scheduled the gate removal for the following weekend. But I also called a surveyor to come out and mark my exact property boundaries. Then I called another company that specialized in landscape barriers. On Saturday morning, I had the beautiful wrought iron gate removed. The HOA board members who happened to be outside that day looked smugly satisfied. Janet actually waved at me from across the street, probably thinking she'd won. What they didn't see was the surveyor who arrived that afternoon to place small flags along my property boundaries. The flags were temporary, but they served their purpose, showing me exactly where my land ended and the HOA's began. On Sunday, the landscape company arrived with their equipment. Instead of a gate, I had them install something much more permanent along my property line. A row of large decorative boulders, each one weighing about 500 pounds, spaced perfectly to prevent any vehicle from passing through that 2-foot section where the HOA's access path crossed my land. The boulders were beautiful, actually. Natural granite with interesting shapes and colors. They looked like intentional landscaping, which they were, but they also created an impenetrable barrier exactly along my property line. I also had the company install what's called a living fence, a dense row of thorny bushes along the side of my driveway. These weren't just decorative. They were specifically chosen for their rapid growth and their ability to create an impenetrable barrier within a few months. But the real masterpiece was what I did with my driveway itself. Since the gate was gone, I had the entire driveway repaved and redesigned. The new design included a circular parking area right at the entrance, with landscaped islands that made it impossible for anyone to drive straight through. You could enter my driveway, but you'd have to loop around and exit the same way you came in. The first test came the following weekend during the community center's monthly event. I watched from my living room window as car after car tried to access the back parking lot through what used to be my gate opening. They could get into my driveway just fine, but thanks to my new landscaping and the circular design, they couldn't get through to the other side. More importantly, those boulders I'd placed along my property line meant that even pedestrians couldn't squeeze through the narrow access path to the back lot. The 2-foot section that crossed my property was now completely blocked. The phone calls started that same evening. First Janet, then other board members, then finally the HOA president himself. They were outraged that I'd made their back parking lot essentially inaccessible. They demanded I remove the boulders and allow access through my property. I politely reminded them that they'd ordered me to remove my gate, and I'd complied completely. The gate was gone. They hadn't mentioned anything about not being allowed to landscape my own property according to my preferences. The legal threats resumed immediately, but this time I was ready. I'd done my homework and consulted with a property attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Every single improvement I'd made was on my own property and was completely legal. The boulders sat exactly on my property line, not an inch beyond it. The HOA's lawyer sent me a formal demand letter, but my attorney's response was swift and devastating. Not only did I have every right to landscape my property as I saw fit, but the HOA had actually been trespassing on my land for years with their informal access arrangement. If they wanted to pursue legal action, I was prepared to file a countersuit for years of unauthorized land use. That shut them up quickly. The real satisfaction came over the next few months as I watched the HOA struggle with their reduced parking capacity. They'd been so focused on gaining access through my property that they hadn't developed any alternative solutions. Community events became logistical nightmares, with people having to park blocks away and walk to the community center. The final twist came 6 months later when the HOA approached me with a formal proposal. They wanted to purchase an easement across my property to restore access to their back parking lot. The asking price? $50,000, plus an agreement that I could install whatever gate system I wanted. I countered with $75,000 and the right to approve any future HOA landscaping or construction projects within 100 feet of my property line. To my surprise, they accepted immediately. The best part? I used the money to install an even more elaborate gate system than before. This time, it was an automated wrought iron beauty with a stone pillar foundation and integrated lighting. It was probably 3 times more impressive than the original gate they'd forced me to remove. I kept the boulders too, incorporating them into a beautiful rock garden that became the envy of the neighborhood. The thorny bushes grew into an elegant natural fence that provided even more privacy than I'd had before. Sometimes I sit on my front porch in the evening looking at my beautiful new gate and remembering how sure the HOA board was that they could push me around. They wanted access to my land so badly that they were willing to make legal threats and impose fines to get it. In the end, they got their access, for a price that was probably 10 times what a reasonable negotiation would have cost them in the first place. And I got a much better gate, a landscaped garden, and the satisfaction of knowing that the HOA learned a valuable lesson about property rights and the dangers of making demands without understanding the consequences. The next one is a petty revenge story. I work from home full-time and rarely drive unless I'm grocery shopping or out for an appointment. In my complex, there are non-reserved spots and reserved spots in the underground garage, all of which are not assigned. As long as you have a reserved sticker on your vehicle, any of the reserved spots, which are all labeled reserved, are fair game. I have a non-reserved sticker because it's $40 cheaper than the reserved pass. I was coming back from an appointment and turned into my neighbor's reserved spot so that I could back my car into the open, non-reserved spot behind me. Lo and behold, male Karen in his rusty 2007 RAV4 starts honking at me for being in his spot, telling me that I can't park there because I don't have a reserved sticker. I told him I was only backing out. I probably should have let it go, but his Karen-ness pissed me off so much. As I was getting on the elevator, I quickly realized he only wanted to park there was because it was right next to the elevator. A light bulb went off in my head and I made my way to the rental office, it's in same building, and asked to upgrade my parking pass. It's an extra $40 I'll be shelling out, but it's worth the petty revenge. I'm waiting for him to leave for work tomorrow so I can move my car into his spot and leave it there for God knows how long. There are perks to being fully remote. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I have another Dutch Navy story, this time a malicious compliance. This happened in Den Helder, approximately 20 years ago. One of my coworkers was a typical Amsterdammer in the worst sense of the word. Loud-mouthed, arrogant, really full of himself, and he thought of himself as untouchable, just because he had been a Dutch Marine for over a decade. Let's call him Adam. Not his real name, obviously. A little disclaimer just to make sure I don't stigmatize people from Amsterdam. I've met a lot of typical Amsterdammers who were so in the best sense of the word. Loud, but really enjoyable, very confident, but humble and decent. Back to Adam with just a few examples. He would brag to people about cheating on his fiancée, but he would also make sure everybody knows he actually really loves her very much. When called out on his hypocrisy, he would get loud and offended, and he would tell you that you just don't understand and to shut the F up. Je snapt er niks van, je moet gewoon je rotbek houden, asterisk heavy Amsterdam accent asterisk. He would argue about new policies and critique everything, but never in a constructive way. It would always be as offensive as possible. He would argue with our chief, a sergeant, and the head of transport, an adjutant, and he would always be loud and deviant and would tell them he was stationed there longer so they should back off and respect him. This always ended undivided because nothing was actually said or done that would warrant any form of punishment or reprimand. It would annoy the hell out of the higher-ups, though. He would operate heavy equipment dangerously. Adam would drive forklifts in a dangerous way, steering too aggressively so the vehicle would behave instable. Lucky for everyone, those machines were very heavy and stable, but even so. Adam once drove on the highway with an empty coach because he had to pick up a group of people. He put the vehicle on cruise control, got out of his chair, stood next to the steering wheel holding it with one hand and used his phone to video himself doing just that. About 20 years ago, so low-quality video with a then-modern phone. Think Nokia/Sony Ericsson just for context. Then he would proudly tell everybody in the driver's pool about his shenanigans and show the video as proud evidence. Nobody ratted him out, but the higher-ups got wind of it, so they asked him about it. Of course, he denied everything, and the video was non-existent according to Adam, so he dodged consequences. He then proceeded by telling all the coworkers about his little talk and ended with something like, "What are they going to do? Fire me?" and then laugh. Later, he got even bolder and he got into even more frequent arguments with the higher-ups, and he started to shout things like, "If you don't like it, then fire me. Astjeni bevalt onslamidan." Then after, he would brag about it and tell everybody they obviously can't fire him, even if they wanted to. Zeken metogni onslan al suvezevile vice. It's fair to say that the atmosphere within our unit grew tense, and it was evident that the higher-ups were very much fed up with Adam's behavior, until one day, Adam overstepped. He got into another argument and came up with his usual bickering. Of course it got loud and he came with his usual "then fire me" comment, but to his horror the adjutant responded with something like, "Great, you're fired. Now walk with me to my office so we can make it official." This went like a shockwave through the driver's pool and we could hear Adam shouting in the office, which was a little further. His screaming started with a lot of fire. The adjutant and sergeant responded in kind. Then Adam's tone changed to a more desperate tone, and after that it got kind of silent. When he left the office, his eyes were red, and he did not say a thing to anyone. In hindsight, it was obvious that the higher-ups were waiting for a moment like this to present itself. Adam took his last PTO and vacation days and was very docile for his last few weeks. Things got a lot more pleasant after his departure. The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened during my vacation in Spain last week, and I'm still fuming about the audacity of some people. I'm staying at this resort, and every morning there's the usual scramble for the good beach chairs by the pool. Fair enough, first come, first served, right? Wrong. According to this one German tourist, probably in his 60s, this dude had the brilliant idea of putting his towel on the best chair right by the pool at like 6 a.m., then disappeared for literally 8 hours. I watched this chair sit empty with just his crusty towel on it from morning until mid-afternoon while families with kids were standing around looking for places to sit. Around 2 p.m., I'd had enough. My girlfriend and I had been sitting on these uncomfortable plastic chairs all day watching this prime real estate go unused. So I moved his towel to the side table and we took the chairs. Cue this entitled boomer showing up around 3 p.m., red as a lobster, ironic. Absolutely losing his mind that someone dared touch his precious towel. He starts yelling at me in broken English about how he reserved the chair and I had no right to move his things. I told him straight up, dude, you can't just dump a towel somewhere at dawn and disappear for 8 hours. That's not how this works. There are families who actually wanted to use these chairs. He gets even more pissed and starts going off about how this is how we do it in Germany, and I'm being very rude to a guest. At this point, I'm done being polite. I looked him dead in the eye and said, well, you're not in Germany anymore, and your towel isn't a ducking reservation system. Find another chair or talk to hotel management if you have a problem. His face went from sunburn red to purple and he stomped off, muttering in German. He came back 10 minutes later with a hotel staff member who very politely explained to him that chairs can't be reserved for extended periods and guests need to actually be using them. The look on his face when the staff sided with me was priceless. He spent the rest of the day shooting dirty looks at us from across the pool. Some people really think the world revolves around them. Like, sorry, Klaus, your towel isn't a magic force field that holds beach chairs hostage all day. Anyway,